Now to an extraordinary day at the COVID inquiry where Sir Patrick Vallance has revealed a damning portrait of Boris Johnson, who he claimed looked broken, struggled to concentrate and was clearly bamboozled by science during the pandemic. The government's former chief scientific advisor noted at the time it was hard work to make sure that the then Prime Minister had understood what a graph was saying.
I think I'm right in saying that the Prime Minister at the time gave up science when he was 15. And I think he'd be the first to admit it wasn't his forte, and that he did struggle with some of the concepts, and we did need to repeat them often.
Well, Vallance revealed that after Johnson contracted COVID, he was really unwell and struggled to concentrate on things. Barrister Andrew O'Connor also picked out a diary extract in which Vallance wrote the PM looked broken, head in hands a lot, and that it was difficult at times to provide him with advice. And Johnson wasn't the only Tory to come off badly in today's session. The inquiry was told that, according to Dominic Cummings, Rishi Sunak said the government should just let people die during a heated argument over the second lockdown. Vallance also noted in his diary that Johnson suggested letting it all rip and that those who would die from contracting the virus had had a good innings. Clearly a very big day at the inquiry, and we really got down to some of the details I think a lot of people have been waiting for, that being, were decisions being taken, in a good way, in a reasonable way? Was it the complete chaos that a lot of people thought it was? Now, I think on the fact that Boris Johnson wasn't across the detail and didn't understand some of the graphs, to me, is no big surprise. I mean, he was never elected as Mr. Detail. He's not Rishi Sunak, who loves a spread chart or loves a graph, loves science and all the rest of it. So that doesn't particularly surprise me. What I think will worry and concern people is that Boris Johnson didn't seem to be taking it seriously. It's one thing not understanding a graph and not perhaps grasping, all the ins and outs of virology. And let's face it, none of us did back in the beginning of the pandemic. It's a different matter when you hear people saying that the Chancellor and the Prime Minister seem to be suggesting old people weren't really worth the bother and let it rip and they'd had a good innings. That is clearly, to my mind, more of a concern.
But it's... I mean, just look at this inquiry in its entirety, and we've had the tittle-tattle, the innuendo, constant finger-pointing. I mean, firstly, it's worth noting that we've spent 100 million quid so far. This is going to go on till 2027. 2020, we've got a PhD in this country for long inquiries, Chilcot, the bloody Sunday inquiry, the list goes on. In Sweden, they completed their COVID inquiry in February 2022. Just shy of 2 years ago. Ours is going to go on for another 3 and a bit years. So we have that to contend with. And what we've got with this kind of buffet of various experts coming out, lots of it on WhatsApp, lots of it written in the diaries. Even today, Vallance going, well, I wrote a bit in my diary, but I didn't really mean it all. It was just my offloading my thoughts. And then that's read out of context in a courtroom, comments that are made in the heated moments in Downing Street when people are having a right royal row, all out of context. WhatsApp became the default place for ministers to do business when, of course, you write casually on WhatsApp because it's that medium. It kind of enlists you to write in that way rather than an official document. But it's still quite informative for us to find out what's going on. It's informative in a kind of Netflix kind of way.
Yeah, it's interesting.
What I'm not getting, though, just to finish that point, is I want to know why we locked an economy down and what analysis was really done on that. I want to know how much they really knew about, not whether somebody said something in passing, whether they quipped something that was a little, gallows humour, whatever. I want real answers.
Sure,
for my hundreds of millions of pounds, I want real answers.
There are a couple of things.
I'm not getting any, not even for Vallance.
No, you're not. But here's, I think, the important point which you made, which is that this inquiry is going on too long. Its scope is too wide. We're not necessarily looking into what we need to look into, and isn't hindsight a wonderful thing? And I get really cross when I hear the scientists, almost posing, saying he's not a scientist. No, he's not. And if he doesn't understand what you're telling him, then actually you, the scientist, are at fault for not giving him good data and good information to highlight either what you want to say. And the very fact that the scientists were disagreeing about things, that you're dealing with politicians, that their job is to go backwards and forwards. We should do this, we should do that, we should do this. So, of course, the conversations that they have during are going to say some pretty torrid things. It's the decisions that they took. And actually, this inquiry should be about how our country can prepare better. And if we're going to go on to 2027, we're not going to learn anything.
And that's the point, isn't it? Did we lock down at the right time? It seems like we didn't, according to Vallance. We didn't lock down at the right time, although there were disputes with Whitty, who we now know was much more, was keener to actually take in all those other things that we found afterwards actually did have such a big effect that actually maybe we shouldn't have actually locked down. You know, loneliness, mental health, jobs falling off the
kids' education,
all those other sort of things. So I agree with both of you. The remit is too wide, and plus, the problem is that the headlines are all grasped by people. You know, Boris Johnson being called the trolley, Matt Hancock, you know, sack Hancock and save lives and save the NHS. You know, all those other sort of things that we've learnt. How useful are they?
Well, going off what you said there, Penny, there was apparently palpable tension between Vallance and Chris Whitty. Vallance called his colleague a delayer after he pushed for the first national lockdown to be later.
Sometimes I would want to push and he might not, and sometimes he was right, and sometimes I think we should have gone earlier. This was an occasion when I think it's clear that we should have gone earlier.
So I feel bad for Whitty because obviously at the time he was being attacked in the streets because people were saying, you locked us down, blah, blah, blah. But he was actually the person, as you say, Penny, he was saying, what about mental health? What about loneliness? What's going to do to the economy? But I think both James and Ian, you're incorrect when you say you're not hearing the truth of the matter, or we're not hearing what we need to really hear to make a better informed decision when this happens again. Because actually, if you watch the inquiry live, there is plenty of that. We are learning all these things, but the headlines that have been pulled out are the things that people want to read about, the sensational parts of things. But people saying
I have
stuff
put
like
myself through some of it, and seriously,
just let people die, for example. That's, you can say, oh, we said in it's gallows humour. I lost my mother during COVID. Hearing that that's how they would disrespect my mother, I want to hear that, because actually I think, well, the Tories were the wrong people, and they were not looking out for the country and the citizens. They were thinking, well, we'll do what we wish. So for me, that's the important stuff that I do want to hear.
But nobody would surely argue that Boris Johnson wants his legacy to be somebody who thinks like that. So clearly, whatever was said, if it was said, or whatever context it was said in, and I would agree that even in, you know, gallows humour, as they keep calling it, there is no place prime ministerially for that kind of thing. But I would, you know, my guess would be that, you know, we will probably have more of this to come, and I don't think it's necessarily a Tory thing either.